more profitable to develop that into housing versus keep it as farmland. And so this has been a trend that happens all across America, all across especially the Sun Belt, but you have residential developers being able to pay more than farmers can for land, and then also the cities are taxing. All the cities are based off of property taxes, and counties are based off property taxes. So they're taxing that property at its kind of theoretical highest and best use. And so the county will look at the farmland and say, this would be more valuable if it was housing. We're going to tax you like it was housing. And then farmers are continually getting taxed out of their properties. And so there's some ag exemption stuff, but still the general trend is land is increasing in value as housing can be built on it, which then takes up prime farmland. And we've been incredibly inefficient just with our space, and looking forward, we've got to do something to change. And I mean, the truth is, we're going to continue to grow. We've grown like crazy as a city. The whole Sun Belt region has grown, but San Antonio and San Antonio-Austin corridor has just exploded, and it's going to continue. So we've got 2.6 million people in our metro area right now. We're projected to be at 3.6 million by 2040. If you look at our population right now, we're relatively young. Like we've got 160,000 university students, 26% university graduate growth, which a lot of people key in on. Is like, where's the future generation going? Where are they getting educated? Where do they want to be? Which is exciting, right? We are a place where young people want to be. Young people are going to raise families, have more babies, population will continue to grow. But then we also have people moving here from California, from New York, from Chicago, where they just spent 6 months in negative degree temperatures and they're trying to get out. And so we have 130 people moving here daily. And so like, where are all these people gonna go, right? And then just in general, especially with apartments, this is another good one. So San Antonio from 2010 to 2020, our population grew by 21% compared to Texas at 17. So we outpaced Texas. And then the US grew at 7%. So we're growing at 3 times the rate of the United States. So this is like, this population growth, this land use challenge is only going to intensify over time. And then when you look at apartments, the red line is absorption. So how many people are actually leasing apartments, how many apartment units are actually getting absorbed into the market, versus the black line, which is new deliveries. So you can see if you're a developer like I am in our firm, you love to see this, right? It means a ton of people are moving here, and there's a ton of demand, but very little supply coming online. And so that means people are going to continue to build. They're going to continue to build housing to keep up with this population growth, and then also employment is the big tie as well, and we're growing our employment extremely fast as well. So it's not a question of if we will grow, it's how we will grow as a city, and how will we use our land, which is becoming more and more of a scarce resource. And so for what we do, we're really big on urban infill development, filling in and getting dense, right? And so when you look at 700 new residents, what does it take? What does it look like to build 700 new homes in this city? And so this is the typical way that we have grown as a city for the last 100 years, right? So you have 4 units an acre, there's a quarter acre lots. So to build 700 new homes, it takes 175 acres to build that. And what does that look like? Usually you're going over farmland, you're going over ranch land, forest land, clearing it out with a bulldozer, pouring pavement, pouring new sewage infrastructure, pouring new electrical infrastructure, and destroying natural habitat. Versus what we're believers in, and what I think we need more of, not saying we shouldn't build more single-family homes, but we need to do more of, is urban infill density, like most other markets. And so we have 2 projects, and so on 3 acres, we're building 700 units of housing. On infill, so former parking lots or abandoned historic buildings. And so right now our policy is subsidizing this, right? With highways being built, with it's just cheaper. Land is cheaper out there versus it's harder to do in the urban core. But as we think about policy, how do we do more of this to better be efficient with our land versus just doing more of the same of eating up prime farm land? So just quick little notes on specifically what we're doing. So 300 Main, This is actually about to deliver this summer. It is a former parking lot that right across from Foss Tower and Geekdom, the Rand building. So it's 32 stories of apartments. A big part of this, the negative side of urban living is you know, theoretically, do you lose space, lose green space, lose access to nature? And so that's been a major thought process, especially as you work with architects, how do you be sustainable, how do you bring nature up the building? So we've got 2 decks of kind of garden space, nature space in the building, pool deck, and then kind of like a sky lounge. We tried to pull a lot of the kind of ground floor nature into the building, bringing people underneath that, creating kind of protected, open, public space. And then over here, we also got Legacy Park downtown, which is an urban park, which we're really happy with. I mean, it's never going to replace country living, but you do need to be conscious of, you don't want to build concrete boxes. You want to be thoughtful, and these are places where people live, and that's where they're going to, this is where people are going to spend their time. The other one is Continental, so this is a really exciting project. It's a 16-story structure with 2 historic buildings, and so this is actually what the site looked like. This is right next to the new UTSA School of Data Science. And so this is, the San Pedro Creek kind of runs through here, which is an incredible urban linear park that the county just is in the process of completing. So we're building a new structure here that's 16 stories. That was just a vacant lay yard, that with nothing going on. And then 2 historic buildings that were vacant. The city of San Antonio owned this old Continental Hotel building, and then the Atlanta building used to be a printing press, and it kind of went through various areas. But there's a lot of dead spaces, especially when you walk through downtown. There's a lot of dead spaces that if we work a little harder, we can reactivate and add more density, add more life into. These are other views. This is an old historic house, so it's the De La Garza house. It's on South Laredo Street. It's one of the oldest structures in San Antonio. And so we preserved that, and then are bringing in kind of a little public plaza with the county to bring in like original old San Antonio habitat, which is a fun project and kind of a side piece of that. Kind of looks like the house from Up right now because it's kind of tucked in between this giant tower, but working with the fabric that we have. And so, that's at the local scale, right? What can we do? We can build more density, we can look at more urban infill opportunities, we can make better use of the existing land that we have, and maybe make it a little harder to just expand and treat land like an infinite resource. Other cities, especially in Asia, so Korea, South Korea, Seoul has an urban growth boundary. So they actually there's a line around the city that says you cannot build around it. So they have tons of green belts that they protected around the city. And so they said, beyond this line, you can't develop anything. This is going to be protected space. They actually now do that in Portland and Seattle as well. And so those are one thing, but the challenge then is it makes all of the property within that line more expensive because now you just made land more scarce. And so when it goes to affordability, these different challenges, there's pros and cons, but these are the things you got to weigh as you're thinking through, policy. What do we want to be encouraging people to do? The other piece to that, from the local side, is to the regional, which Stephen mentioned a little bit. And so one thing that we are drastically lacking in the South in general, but mainly in America, is a regional government system. So we have state governments, which really are just kind of drawn on arbitrary political lines. But we really don't have regional government systems based on how the world actually works. And so there's an amazing artist kind of turned urban planner named Peter Fend, who I highly recommend looking into. But he was an artist, activist, nature kind of proponent in the 70s. And then he saw, it was only so much that the activism could do. And so he got actively into urban planning and development. And so he really kind of took things in a different world, looked at it from an artist, and he said, let's look at how nature actually works. And a lot of our political lines, our political boundaries, do not align with nature. You've got especially in the Middle East, right? You've got country boundaries just smack dab in the middle of a river, or of a migration path, or of a food system. And so he looked at, how should the U.S. be organized if it was based off of our watersheds? And so these recommended, this is actually how our states or our regional governments should work. We were actually trying to align our political systems with our natural resources. He does that in the Middle East, he did that in a lot of other places, but he's a really kind of free thinker and an interesting thinker, trying to change people's perspective on let's align our political systems with our natural resources so we don't have conflicts, brewing because of our arbitrary political nature. And then also mega regions, so also where are people gathering? People like to gather in huddles, right? This way, cities and tribes and bands, so people like to be together. And so as we think about a lot of this growth, thankfully, I think that the overwhelming trend will be density and compaction. So most of the growth in the US is actually happening in a regional kind of, because that's where the jobs are, and that's where people's relatives are, and that's where opportunities are. So, the Northeast, Florida, Gulf Coast, the Atlantic, and then our little Texas Triangle area, which is a really interesting space. And so I would really advocate for more regional efforts, right? Right now, we have city governments, but if the city of San Antonio has a policy that's really environmentally friendly, a developer can just hop outside of the city lines and move into the county unincorporated lands and do whatever they want. So there's a disconnect between policy. And so how do you align city, county, aquifer sheds, right? How do we actually enforce the Edward Aquifer protection system and actually have a thoughtful development plan? And so we don't have an infrastructure like that right now. We don't have any mechanism outside of the state level, and we can't really count on them for much, to enforce any kind of planning. And so I would really love to see us have more robust regional governmental system. They actually have this in Massachusetts and Florida, because in Florida they've had to react to climate change and natural disasters. So they've actually have a pretty beefed up regional government, mainly because of emergency systems. And then also in the Northwest, in general, politically, they're more progressive and advanced. And so this is a concept that we've been talking a lot about recently. Everybody knows about the Texas Triangle: San Antonio, Austin, Houston, Dallas. It's 18 million people, growing like crazy. But there's also a southern triangle that oftentimes is much less appreciated. So if you look at San Antonio down to South Texas and northern Mexico, so San Antonio, Laredo, Monterey, Brownsville, Corpus Christi, that's 15 million people. And so if you look at it from that perspective, and mainly minority population, right? And so if you look at it from that perspective, San Antonio is actually in the middle of an hourglass of 30 plus million people with a ton of opportunity, a ton of economic growth, but then also a ton of really delicate ecosystems. And so as this area really explodes and grows, and we're going to have pressure on our water systems, right? Like Monterey, they wanted to have Tesla come in, but there was a huge issue with, will they have enough water, right? As now Brownsville, Elon's trying to have a space camp in Brownsville. It's are we going to be able to support that? And if we're going to, we need to be thinking about that regionally, and we need to be preparing for that regionally. And we don't have that infrastructure in place currently. So, as we kind of go on, just to wrap it up, as we kind of move on to the rest of the topics, I think we're going to get really into the weeds on the how, but wanted to start off thinking about what is our current landscape, what are we working with, and as we think about food, how are we using our land, and how could we be more efficient and better prepared for all the growth that's going to come, because it's not going to get easier. It's just going to be more pressure on land prices, more population pressure, more pressure on food systems. And so we need to be thinking about this actively in order not to get ourselves in trouble in the future.